Look closely at the person in your life who forgives easily, the one who absorbs the tension in the room, absorbs your bad days, and quietly carries the emotional weight you are too weak to manage yourself. You think you figured them out. You think their patience is a green light, a blank check for your poor behavior. You think they are soft. That is the single most dangerous miscalculation you will ever make. What you are looking at is not weakness. It is a highly sophisticated organic surveillance system. An empath doesn't just feel, they register. They are silently mapping your micro-expressions, cataloging your insecurities, and tracking the exact architecture of your psychological flaws. They see the real you, the broken version you hide from the rest of the world. And up until now, they have used that data to protect you from yourself. But every human system has a breaking point. When you push an empath past theirs, the filtration system shuts down, the grace evaporates. And all that data they've been gathering, it turns into a weapon. They won't scream, they won't throw things. They will look you dead in the eye, drop their voice to a whisper, and dismantle your entire identity using nothing but the unvarnished truth you thought they were too blind to see. If you have ever wondered what happens when the gentlest person you know decides they are finally done protecting you, pay very close attention. Because the psychological fallout isn't just severe, it's terminal to your ego. We live in a world obsessed with dominant body language, aggressive posturing, and overt displays of power. We are taught to look at the loudest voice in the room as the threat. But true behavioral intelligence dictates otherwise. The most dangerous element in any environment is never the wolf roaring at the gate. It is the quiet observer who knows exactly how the wolf thinks. Today we are stripping away the soft, poetic language surrounding the word empath and looking at the raw, clinical reality of emotional intelligence weaponized. If you have an empath in your life whom you are currently testing, or if you are an empath who has been pushed to the absolute edge of your human endurance, what we are about to break down is critical to your survival. Over the next few minutes, I am going to show you the precise anatomical shift that happens when a person who feels everything decides to feel absolutely nothing for you. You will understand the hidden mechanism of the empathic snap, the exact reason why their retaliation bypasses your physical defenses and strikes directly at your core identity, and how a single cold realization can permanently alter the power dynamic in a relationship. If you do not understand this mechanism, you are walking through a psychological minefield blindfolded. Let's look at the baseline behavior. When you interact with an empath, they are constantly adjusting their internal thermostat to keep the environment comfortable for you. They read your pupil dilation, the vocal fry in your speech, the slight tension in your shoulders, and they adapt. To the untrained eye, to the manipulator, this looks like compliance. It looks like submission. But let's be entirely accurate about what is actually happening. They are profiling you, not out of malice, but out of a biological need for harmony. They know your triggers. They know what makes you feel small, what makes you feel powerful, and where your deepest shame lies. They hold your entire psychological blueprint in their hands. And for months or even years, they choose to hold it gently. They choose to ignore the cracks in your armor because they genuinely believe you can heal. But a sponge can only hold so much toxic water before its structural integrity fails. Every time you manipulate, every time you gaslight, every time you take their kindness and weaponize it against them, you are filling that reservoir. Then comes the moment of the snap. It isn't loud. It doesn't look like a tantrum. In fact, if you aren't paying attention to the micro shifts in their behavior, you might miss it entirely. The jaw relaxes. The vocal pitch drops. The warmth in the eyes vanishes, replaced by the cold, detached gaze of a poker player reading a mark. When an empath breaks, they do not become angry. Angry people are sloppy. Angry people make mistakes. No, when an empath breaks, they become objective. This is where the consequences become brutal. The manipulator expects an emotional reaction. They are prepared for tears, arguments, or defensive posturing. They feed on it. But instead, they are met with a clinical execution. The empath stops filtering the truth. Because they know you so deeply, they know exactly which words will bypass your ego defenses. They know the precise insecurity you stay up at night worrying about. And with absolute calm clarity, they lay it out on the table. They speak the unvarnished reality of who you are, what you are doing, and why you are doing it. They strip away your justifications, your projections, and your masks in a matter of seconds. It feels brutal because it is entirely accurate. There is no exaggeration to argue against. It is a mirror held up to your darkest corners, forced upon you by the one person you thought you could easily deceive. The final consequence is the most devastating, and it is entirely irreversible. Once the empath has delivered the truth, they execute the total exit. In behavioral psychology, we look at anchor points, the things that tie a person to an environment or a relationship. An empath simply deletes the anchor. They don't block you to get your attention. They don't play mind games to make you miss them. They simply cease to care. You become a stranger who happens to share their history. Your attempts to provoke them, to hurt them, or to win them back hit a wall of absolute indifference. Never mistake a high capacity for patience for a lack of visual acuity. They see everything. They tolerate it until they don't. And when they finally decide to close the door, they don't just lock it, they remove the door entirely, leaving you standing in the cold, forced to look at the wreckage of the person you thought you could break. To truly understand the architecture of an empath, you must first dismantle the cultural myth that empathy is synonymous with softness. We are conditioned by popular psychology to view the empathic individual as a fragile, emotionally porous creature, someone who is easily overwhelmed by the loud shifts in their environment and helplessly tossed about by the feelings of others. This is a profound and highly dangerous mischaracterization. In the realm of advanced behavioral intelligence, we recognize that the baseline of an empath is not defined by emotional vulnerability, but by an elevated, highly sophisticated state of sensory compliance. They are not weak, they are hyper-aware. They operate at a cognitive frequency that allows them to process micro-expressions, tonal shifts, and subtle changes in baseline behavior that the average person completely misses. This elevated baseline functions as an involuntary organic surveillance system. While a manipulator believes they are successfully managing an impression or flying under the radar, the empath is quietly, continuously registering the data. They track the exact architecture of your psychological flaws. They notice the precise moment your posture shifts when a specific topic is raised, the slight micro-tremor in your hand when you are defensive, and the subtle vocal fry that betrays your hidden insecurity. This is not an active, malicious profiling tactic. It is their default state of being. They process human behavior with the analytical precision of a software program running in the background. The compliance you think you see is actually a conscious, deliberate choice to use that gathered intelligence for protection rather than destruction. Because their natural inclination is toward harmony, they take the vast amount of psychological data they collect and use it to buffer the relationship. They accommodate your bad moods, they overlook your passive-aggressive jabs, and they consciously smooth over the cracks in your facade because they can see the underlying pain that drives your behavior. To the untrained eye, particularly to a narcissist or a predator, this constant adaptation looks like a green light. It looks like submissiveness. The manipulator mistakes the empath's patience for blindness, assuming that because no boundary has been violently enforced, no boundary exists. This is the single most critical error you can make when dealing with this personality type. The empath's high capacity for tolerance is not a lack of vision, it is a temporary withholding of judgment. They see the real you, the broken, insecure version you hide from the rest of the world, and they choose to hold that information gently. However, this means that while you think you are playing them, They are actually building an incredibly detailed, highly accurate psychological profile of your entire identity. They know exactly what makes you feel powerful, what makes you feel small, and where your deepest, most toxic shame lies. They possess the complete blueprint to your ego. The illusion of compliance remains steady only as long as their internal threshold is respected. But beneath that calm, accommodating exterior is a cold, structural repository of truth. You are not deceiving them. You are merely being granted a probationary period of grace. Every instance of manipulation, every lie, and every attempt to exploit their kindness is not forgotten. It is simply logged into the system. The baseline remains cooperative, but the file is growing, and the strategic advantage belongs entirely to the quiet observer who knows your mind better than you do. To understand the tipping point of this dynamic, you must examine the structural limitations of the empathic mind. In behavioral profiling, we look at human beings as closed systems with finite cognitive and emotional processing capacities. An empath does not possess an infinite reservoir. Rather, they operate like a highly specialized organic sponge. Their default state is absorptive, constantly taking in the emotional waste, hidden anxieties, and unexpressed hostility of the people around them. When you are in a relationship with a manipulator or a narcissist, this absorptive quality is pushed to its absolute physiological limits. The manipulator relies on the empath to act as an emotional filtration system, dumping their insecurity, their unearned anger, and their psychological projection onto a partner who quietly metabolizes the toxicity for the sake of peace. For a prolonged period, the empath system handles this load. They absorb the unspoken tension in the room, the sharp edges of your passive aggression, and the subtle, ongoing attempts to gaslight them into doubting their own reality. But every material in nature has a saturation point, a precise threshold where it can no longer hold any more weight without its internal architecture failing. The mistake the manipulator makes is assuming this capacity is bottomless, because the empath does not immediately retaliate or display overt signs of distress. In reality, the empath is silently approaching a state of critical mass. Every single toxic interaction, every minor deception, and every calculated withdrawal of affection acts as a heavy drop of water filling a finite container. As the saturation point nears, the cognitive load required to maintain the illusion of harmony becomes staggering. The empath is forced to expend an immense amount of psychological energy just to suppress the massive store of data they have accumulated about your bad behavior. They are actively fighting their own intelligence to keep giving you the benefit of the doubt. This creates a state of intense internal pressure. When that container finally fills to the very top, the structural integrity of the empath's tolerance completely collapses. This collapse triggers an involuntary, high-stakes cognitive shift within their brain. The human mind, when pushed to its absolute limit of emotional endurance, will instinctively deploy a defense mechanism to preserve its own sanity. For the empath, this mechanism is a sudden, total shutdown of the emotional filtration system. The absorptive sponge instantly hardens into a solid, unyielding stone. The capacity to feel for you, to understand your perspective, or to care about your emotional well-being is abruptly terminated by the brain's survival wiring. This is not a conscious choice made out of spite or anger. It is an automatic, systemic response to prolonged emotional saturation. The moment this threshold is crossed, the entire landscape of the relationship permanently alters. The manipulator, accustomed to a partner who continuously absorbs and forgives their behavior, is completely unaware that they have just triggered a psychological event from which there is no return. The reservoir is full, the filtration system has gone completely offline, and the vast, accumulated weight of all your manipulation is about to be reflected right back at you with terrifying clarity. The transition from the saturation point to the active dismantling of a manipulator is marked by a terrifying shift in operational intelligence. When the empath's emotional filtration system goes completely offline, the psychological mask worn by the abuser is not merely loosened, it is violently and systematically stripped away. In typical human conflict, an individual who has been pushed to their limit will strike back with emotional volatility, utilizing anger, insults, or defensive posturing. A manipulator knows exactly how to handle that response because emotional chaos is their native language. They can easily twist someone else's rage to make themselves look like the victim. However, when an empath reaches this stage, they do not weaponize emotion. Instead, they weaponize the precise, objective data they have spent months or years silently cataloging. The empath shifts seamlessly from a passive absorber of your toxic behavior to an active, cold-blooded analyst of your deepest psychological insecurities. All those micro-expressions you thought they missed, all the subtle lies you thought you slipped past them, and all the hidden shames you buried deep within your psyche are suddenly brought into the light. The mask you have meticulously crafted to present yourself as strong, virtuous, or superior is effortlessly dissolved because the empath possesses the exact blueprint of its construction. They know the precise difference between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. Because their empathy has been shut off as a survival mechanism, they no longer feel any biological compulsion to protect your feelings or preserve your ego. The information they deploy is not delivered to win an argument or to extract an apology. It is deployed to state an undeniable, structural reality. The sheer brutality of this phase lies in the absolute accuracy of their assessment. They target the exact foundational pillar upon which your entire self-esteem is built. If your identity relies on being seen as the smartest person in the room, they will calmly and logically expose the profound ignorance and insecurity driving your arrogance. If your identity relies on being the victim, they will systematically chart the exact timeline of your manipulations, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are the architect of your own misery. There is no hyperbole in their delivery, no exaggeration for you to latitudinally attack, and no emotional hooks for you to exploit. They speak with the detached, unwavering certainty of a behavioral profiler reading a case file aloud. The manipulator suddenly finds themselves completely exposed, standing before someone who sees through every defense mechanism, every projection, and every deflection they try to employ. Every tactic that worked in the past, the gaslighting, the guilt trips, the feigned indifference, falls completely flat against this new, non-reactive version of the empath. You are forced to look at the unvarnished truth of your own brokenness, stripped of the illusions you use to sleep at night. The empath has ceased to be your emotional cushion and has instead become a mirror reflecting your darkest, most pathetic realities back at you with surgical precision, leaving your ego completely shattered beneath the weight of an undeniable truth you can no longer escape or deny. This brings us to the operational execution of the consequence, a phase defined by calculated reciprocity. In behavioral science, we analyze the exact mechanics of retaliation, and when an ordinary person strikes back, it is almost always fueled by a reactive spike in adrenaline. They yell, they pacing the room, their voice trembles, and their body language betrays their internal agitation. A manipulator looks at this display and feels an immediate sense of control because they recognize that they have successfully dictated the emotional state of their target. But when an empath executes the final consequence, the dynamic is entirely reversed. There is no explosive rage, no theatrical crying, and no desperate need validation. The response is characterized by a terrifying, hyper-calibrated truth delivered with surgical, non-reactive precision. The empath operates with a flat affect, their posture completely settled, their breathing rhythmic, and their eyes locked onto yours with a terrifying level of stillness. They do not raise their voice. Instead, they often drop it to a quiet, unshakable whisper that forces you to lean in to hear your own psychological dissection. The brutality of this method lies in its absolute lack of emotional friction. When you throw a punch at a wall, the wall does not get angry at you. It simply shatters your hand because it is solid and unyielding. The empath becomes that wall. Every single word they choose is deliberately selected based on the years of data they have gathered regarding your specific ego vulnerabilities. They do not use generic insults. Instead, they reference specific moments, exact phrases you used, and the hidden motivations behind your actions that you believed were completely secret. They lay bare the precise mechanics of your manipulation, explaining to you exactly why you did it, what you were hoping to achieve, and how pathetic the attempt actually was. They trace the lineage of your bad behavior directly back to your deepest, most desperate insecurities, showing you that your entire dominant persona is nothing more than a fragile compensation strategy for a profound sense of inadequacy. The manipulator attempts to interrupt, to deploy their standard gaslighting techniques, or to flip the script and play the victim. But these tactics immediately ricochet off the empath's absolute indifference. The empath simply waits for the interruption to finish, completely unaffected by the words, and then continues their calm, systematic breakdown exactly where they left off. This non-reactive delivery completely disarms the manipulator's neurological system, because the human brain is wired to mirror the emotions of the person across from them. When the manipulator meets a wall of absolute icy calm, their own nervous system begins to spike with panic. The reality they have carefully constructed to protect their fragile self-esteem is permanently dismantled in a matter of minutes. They are forced to sit in the quiet room and listen to an objective, flawless monologue that details every lie they have ever told themselves. The empath does not shout for justice. They merely state the verdict with the cold finality of a judge reading a life sentence. The illusion of your control evaporates entirely, replaced by the sickening realization that the person you thought you were manipulating has actually been sitting in the control room the entire time, quietly observing your flaws, and has now decided to pull the lever that brings your entire psychological house of cards crashing down around you. The final phase of this behavioral shift culminates in the total, irreversible execution of the permanent severance. In the study of human dynamics and relationship architecture, we track the specific anchor points that keep individuals psychologically bonded to one another, even within highly toxic environments. For the average person, ending a relationship involves an agonizingly slow, cyclical process of breaking up, experiencing withdrawal, re-engaging out of guilt or loneliness, and repeating the cycle. A manipulator relies on this predictable human frailty, fully expecting that even after a massive confrontation or a brutal truth-telling session, there will be an emotional hangover that allows them to negotiate their way back into the target's life. They count on the lingering presence of resentment or anger, because in the mathematics of behavior, anger is still an investment of emotional currency. It means the door is still on its hinges. But when an empath reaches keynote number 5, they do not merely close the door, they completely eradicate the doorway itself. They execute a total, absolute psychological eviction of the manipulator from their internal map. The transition is marked by the sudden and complete absence of any emotional residue whatsoever. There is no lingering malice, no hidden desire for revenge, and no secret hope that the manipulator will suffer or change. All of it is replaced by an impenetrable, freezing wall of absolute indifference. To the human brain, indifference is far more devastating than hatred, because hatred still acknowledges your existence and your significance. Indifference means you have been reduced to absolute zero. You become entirely inconsequential, a non-entity, a ghost who no longer possesses the power to register even a flicker of an emotional response from them. The empath simply deletes the target from their cognitive software. When the manipulator attempts to initiate contact, whether through calculated apologies, manufactured crises, flying intermediaries, or overt provocations designed to spark a defensive reaction, they are met with a psychological void. The empath does not block you out of anger or to make a dramatic point. They block you with the casual, detached efficiency of someone clearing spam from an email inbox. If you happen to cross paths with them physically, their gaze will pass right through you as if you are made of glass. There is no micro-expression of discomfort, no tightening of the jaw, and no acceleration of their respiratory rate. Your presence no longer registers on their nervous system because they have entirely uncoupled their reality from yours. This level of permanent severance is deeply unsettling to a manipulator's psychological framework, as their entire self-worth is predicated on their ability to affect and control the emotional states of others. To stand before someone who once absorbed your every mood, someone who once offered infinite grace, and to realize that you now hold fewer consequences to them than a stranger on the street, causes a profound ego collapse. The manipulator is left trapped in an echo chamber of their own making, forced to carry the full weight of the brutal truths they were just handed, with absolutely no avenue for closure, negotiation, or redemption. The empath has moved on completely, not by running away, but by simply erasing the space you once occupied in their mind, leaving an empty, silent expanse where your influence used to be, ensuring that no matter how hard you scream into the void, no sound will ever return to comfort your shattered ego.